It was supposed to be the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Celebration, Florida, a town dreamed up by the Walt Disney Company itself, was built to be a utopia. Meticulously planned, pastel-painted homes, white picket fences, children on bicycles, seasonal parades, and town-wide Christmas lights. Celebration wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a fantasy. But by the start of 2020, in one of those cozy little houses nestled on Reserve Place, a nightmare had already taken root, and for weeks it went unnoticed. Behind those well-manicured hedges, beneath the calm charm of a perfect American suburb, a family lay dead, silently decomposing, murdered, and the man who did it, their own father, was still living inside the house. Anthony Todt wasn't a stranger to pressure. He was a husband, a father of 3, and a physical therapist who once ran a seemingly successful clinic back in Connecticut. His wife, Megan, homeschooled their kids and was active in online parenting groups. From the outside, they were the portrait of a close-knit, loving family. Faithful, private, respectable. But that was a shell, a thin layer of normalcy stretched over years of crumbling lies, financial ruin, and psychological unraveling. And as the pressures around Anthony grew, debt, fraud investigations, a collapsing business, so did something darker inside him, something that would eventually drive him to murder the very people he claimed to love most. By the time the Todts relocated to Celebration in 2019, it wasn't a fresh start, it was an escape. Federal agents were investigating Anthony for massive healthcare fraud. His clinics were bleeding money, and the walls were closing in. But rather than confront reality, he buried it. They moved to Florida without telling many. They didn't register the children for local schools. They kept to themselves. Neighbors rarely saw them, but that didn't raise alarms. This was 2019. The world was turning inward, and in Celebration, people minded their own business. December arrived, and with it, Florida's version of holiday cheer. But something about the Todt household began to feel off. They weren't decorating. The kids weren't outside. Megan's usually active Facebook page had gone dark. No Christmas posts, no updates. But it was the holiday season. People assumed they were traveling or staying private. Nobody suspected the truth, that inside that beige 2-story home, Megan, Alek, Tyler, and little Zoe were already dead. It was only when federal agents arrived in mid-January 2020, intending to arrest Anthony for the insurance fraud he could no longer outrun, that anyone discovered what had really happened. When they stepped inside the house, the smell hit them first. The air was thick with rot. They moved carefully, expecting a confrontation over white-collar crime. What they found instead was a horror no badge had prepared them for. In one bedroom lay the lifeless bodies of Megan Todt and the children. All 3 children, Alek, 13, Tyler, 11, Zoe, just 4 years old, and not far from them, on a blood-stained mattress, lay Anthony himself. Barely conscious, his body flooded with Benadryl, his voice weak, his story ready. The news stunned the country. A whole family wiped out, not by accident, not by an outsider, but from within. The man who was supposed to protect them had turned predator. Anthony Todt had killed them, lived with their bodies for weeks, and told no one. Worse still, neighbors recalled seeing him casually walking the dog, smiling, waving. He had answered text messages, made social media posts, all while his family's corpses lay decomposing in the home. What happened inside that house was not a moment of madness. It was planned. Toxicology reports would later show that all the children had lethal levels of Benadryl in their systems, too much to have taken on their own. Megan's death showed signs of violence, not suicide. And Anthony? He claimed they'd all made a family suicide pact, that Megan helped kill the kids, that he only finished what she started. But the evidence didn't support his version. What it supported was a slow, premeditated annihilation, one carried out by a father who had decided that if his world was falling apart, he'd rather end his family than let them live without him. Even more disturbing than the murders themselves was what Anthony did afterward. For nearly a month, he lived in that home with their bodies. He reportedly attempted suicide multiple times but survived. He left the corpses in the beds, closed the doors, and kept existing, as if in some kind of psychological fog. When asked why, his answers shifted constantly. Sometimes he said Megan killed the kids. Sometimes he said they all wanted to die together. Other times he blamed outside forces, spiritual beliefs, even hinted at being under control of something greater. But what he never gave was clarity, because there was none, just horror. Anthony Todt's background only made the case more chilling. Years earlier, his own father, Robert Todt, had been convicted in a bizarre plot to kill Anthony's mother. When Anthony was just a child, his father had hired a hitman to shoot his mother in the face. She survived, but was permanently blind in one eye. That trauma loomed large over Anthony's early life, and now, years later, the cycle of familial violence had returned. This time, with Anthony as the destroyer. His arrest sent shockwaves through both Florida and Connecticut. Former patients and clients from his physical therapy practice were horrified. Friends who had known the Todts as a loving, smiling, spiritual family couldn't believe it. But the truth was indisputable. There were no other suspects. The physical evidence, autopsies, and digital trails all pointed to Anthony and Anthony alone. And while the motive was complex, involving debt, delusion, and control, the result was devastatingly simple. 4 lives ended, 3 of them children. The trial, when it came, was swift and devastating. Prosecutors painted the picture of a man unraveling, who saw his only escape not through recovery or confession, but through extermination. They told the jury of how the children were drugged, how Megan likely tried to fight back, and how Anthony tried to cover it all up with silence. The jury didn't take long. Anthony Todt was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will die behind bars just as his family died behind the walls he built around them. But even now, years later, questions remain. How much of this was insanity, and how much was evil? How does a man go from healer to killer, from father to executioner? Some believe Anthony Todt suffered a psychological breakdown. Others believe he simply couldn't bear the loss of control. What is certain is that 3 innocent children, a devoted wife, and even a dog lost their lives. And the man responsible still writes letters from prison insisting on his innocence, insisting that something else happened, something the world wouldn't understand. But the truth doesn't lie. The house told the story. The silence told the story. The rot, the blood, the empty bedrooms. They all told the truth. Before the murders, the Todt home was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Behind the blinds, the days blurred together. Anthony Todt had stopped working. Megan no longer reached out to friends. The children weren't seen at parks, not even in the backyard. The curtains stayed drawn, the mail piled up, and the only signs of life were the occasional movements of Anthony, walking the family dog, retrieving a package, answering with polite nods when greeted. There were no screams, no alarms, only a slow descent into darkness that no one could see from the outside. And perhaps that was what Anthony counted on, that no one would look too closely, that no one would care, that time would pass, and when everything was over, he would be gone too. But death did not come for him, not in the way he planned. Anthony would later claim that he tried multiple times to end his own life. He said he took Benadryl in massive amounts, that he stabbed himself, that he lay waiting for the final breath. But something always stopped it. A knock at the door, a fading consciousness, or perhaps something inside him refused to finish what he started. Whatever the reason, Anthony Todt lived. He lived for weeks in a house with the dead. And that detail is one of the most disturbing elements of this entire story. Autopsy reports revealed that the bodies had begun to decompose significantly by the time law enforcement arrived. The odor was overwhelming. The heat of Florida, even in winter, had turned the house into a silent grave. Blankets were pulled up over the children. Megan lay on the bed. The dog, Breezy, had been stabbed. And all of them, every single life in that home, had been extinguished by Anthony's hand. It wasn't just the fact of the murders. It was the aftermath. The choice to live in the same space, to exist among the decay, to sleep and eat and think and breathe while their bodies lay in the next room. Psychologists have tried to explain this kind of behavior. Some say it's dissociation, the mind breaking away from the horror it has created. Others say it's a form of psychosis. But perhaps the most terrifying possibility is that it wasn't madness at all. That Anthony Todt simply made peace with what he had done. That his conscience didn't crumble. That he believed what he told investigators. That he had saved his family from something worse. Because that was what he clung to. The idea that death was mercy, not murder. In the letters he would later write from jail, Anthony painted a twisted picture. He described visions, a belief in reincarnation, a spiritual realm where his family waited for him. He claimed Megan had been sick for years, that she couldn't bear the thought of the family being separated, that she was in on it, that the children understood, that they agreed. He said they watched Star Wars the night before, that they were happy, peaceful, that it wasn't violence, it was transition. But every detail from the crime scene contradicted him. The children had been sedated. They had no choice. Megan had been injured. The dog had been stabbed. There was no peace in that house. Only silence. Only death. Back in Connecticut, the fallout was massive. Former patients of Anthony's clinic were horrified. Some had trusted him for years. He had been a respected physical therapist, known for working with injured athletes, elderly patients, children, a man who once healed, now a killer. His financial crimes had already cast shadows on his name, but the murders buried it completely. Authorities uncovered more evidence of fraud, falsified insurance claims, ghost patients, stolen identities. The empire he built had been rotten for years, and the collapse had been inevitable. But no one expected it to take the lives of 4 innocents with it. Megan Todt, too, was mourned across multiple states. Her friends described her as devoted, quiet, endlessly patient. A mother who homeschooled not out of control, but love. She had battled chronic illness for years. There were days when she couldn't get out of bed. She had leaned on Anthony for support, and perhaps that dependency, that complete trust, had been her undoing. In his version of events, she was a partner in death. But her autopsy suggested otherwise. She fought, she bled. She didn't go willingly. The children were remembered with small memorials, flowers left at their home, candlelight vigils held in silence. Alek was known for his curiosity. He loved science. Tyler, more sensitive, was attached to his mother. Zoe, the baby, had barely started living. All 3 were lost before they had a chance to escape the walls closing in around them. And even now, what hurts most for many who followed the case wasn't just the crime. It was how long it went unnoticed. That a family could be murdered and lie dead for weeks while the world kept turning. During Anthony's trial, the courtroom was filled with grief and disbelief. Prosecutors laid out every disturbing fact: the overdoses, the timing, the isolation, the lack of remorse. His defense team tried to introduce the idea of mental instability, of spiritual delusion, of overwhelming pressure. But the jury saw it differently. This wasn't insanity, this was choice. Cold, methodical, planned choice. The kind of crime that doesn't happen in a single moment, but over days, months, even years of preparation, silently building toward a final, irreversible act. One of the most painful testimonies came from a family friend who had been texting Megan around the time of the murders. Messages went unanswered. Then came brief, odd replies that didn't sound like her. Later, it would be revealed those texts were sent by Anthony using her phone, pretending she was still alive, pretending everything was fine. He had even accessed her Facebook to keep up appearances. It was deception layered over horror, a mask to delay discovery. To this day, Anthony Todt maintains his version of the truth. In his letters, he speaks in riddles. He talks about meeting again, of light, of destiny. But beneath those words is a man who sits in a prison cell, alone, aging, forgotten. There is no redemption arc here, no sudden confession, no breakdown, just silence, like the silence that had filled the house for so many weeks before the agents arrived. Long before Anthony Todt became the man who murdered his wife and children, he was a little boy living under a different kind of fear. His story didn't begin with celebration, Florida, or with Megan, or even with his children. It began in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, inside another house with secrets, where his father, Robert Todt, taught him a very different definition of love. A love filled with manipulation, betrayal, and betrayal dressed in silence. Because when Anthony was just 4 years old, his father tried to have his mother killed. The details of that 1980 crime were so surreal that few people believed them, even when proven in court. Robert Todt was a high school teacher and wrestling coach. He was respected, educated, married with 2 children. But beneath his polished appearance, he had a double life. Affairs, lies, secrets. And when it all began to close in, financially, emotionally, he hired a hitman to shoot his wife Loretta in the head while she slept in their home. Somehow, miraculously, Loretta survived. She lost vision in one eye. She would never be the same, but she lived and refused to press charges against her husband. Anthony, just a child then, was home when it happened. He would later describe waking up to screams, to the smell of blood. It was chaos he could never forget. And when the truth came out, that his own father had orchestrated the murder, Anthony's reality was shattered. His father went to prison. His mother, loyal to a fault, never divorced him. She kept the family together in name, if not in spirit. And Anthony? He learned that love could come with violence, that a parent could smile and destroy, that the people closest to you could also be the most dangerous. This trauma did not vanish. It burrowed deep, shaping him in ways he couldn't understand. And though Anthony went on to build a life that looked stable on the surface, a career in medicine, a wife, children, a house, he carried that early darkness with him. Some traumas don't explode. They ferment, they wait, they echo. People who knew Anthony in adulthood described him as friendly, helpful, deeply religious. He volunteered. He coached youth sports. He even went to church regularly. But underneath it all was a need for control, a quiet rigidity in how he lived, how he parented, how he ran his clinic. Megan, his wife, was equally reserved. She had health problems, was in and out of treatment for Lyme disease and chronic fatigue. She homeschooled the kids and didn't socialize much. The family created their own little world, tight, sealed, self-contained. And as Anthony's financial world began to fall apart, that sealed bubble became even smaller. The collapse of his Connecticut practice wasn't just about bad business decisions. It was fraud, plain and simple. Anthony was billing insurance companies for therapy sessions that never happened. He created fake patient records. He inflated charges. It went on for years, tens of thousands of dollars stolen. He was under federal investigation. He knew he was going to be arrested. And instead of facing it, he ran. He packed up his family, moved them to Celebration, and hoped no one would find him. But the law never forgets, and neither does fear. As the months passed in Florida, Anthony withdrew further from reality. His letters and jailhouse statements show a man unraveling, referencing Bible verses, reincarnation, even quoting from the book of Revelation. He claimed he had been chosen in some way, that the world was ending, that he needed to deliver his family to peace before the coming chaos. But prosecutors argued that none of it was real, that these delusions were convenient, created after the murders to mask what was really a selfish, cold-hearted decision to avoid shame, ruin, and responsibility by simply erasing the lives that depended on him. One of the most chilling discoveries came from a note found in the home, a journal entry where Anthony described the children's last day as if it were a goodbye. He wrote that they had said their prayers and knew what was coming. He said they were at peace, but no one else saw it that way. Medical examiners found signs of struggle. The children had been given enormous doses of Benadryl. Too much for any therapeutic reason. It was clearly used to sedate them, to make them helpless. Then he smothered them. It was a methodical process, not sudden, not chaotic, controlled, planned. And yet, even after all of this, Anthony refused to accept guilt. In court, he pleaded not guilty. During the trial, he showed no outbursts, no emotion. His expression remained eerily calm. The prosecution laid out every brutal detail. The defense tried to argue mental illness, but it wasn't enough. The jury saw through it. They saw the evidence, the lies, the deliberate choices. And when the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Anthony didn't flinch. He was sentenced to life in prison, 4 times over. One for each soul he took. The tragedy of the Todt family lies not just in their deaths, but in the fact that no one saw it coming, or worse, that some did and stayed silent. There were hints. Friends in Connecticut had grown concerned when Megan stopped returning calls. One neighbor in Florida recalled a strange smell weeks before the bodies were found. Others noticed that the house had gone dark, that no one came and went, but no one intervened. Because people assume the best, or because they don't want to intrude, or because, in a place like Celebration, nothing bad is supposed to happen. After the trial, Megan's family released a statement filled with heartbreak. They called her a loving daughter, a devoted mother, someone who deserved protection, not betrayal. They refused to accept Anthony's narrative, that she was part of it. They said he used her illness as a shield, that he murdered her, then blamed her to save his own skin. And they were right. Megan had lived a life of quiet endurance. She trusted Anthony to carry them through. She never expected that the man she married would become her executioner. In the years since, the case of Anthony Todt has faded from national headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. But in Celebration, Florida, that house on Reserve Place still stands. No matter who moves in next, the walls will remember. The silence will remember. Because what happened inside can't be scrubbed away. It lingers, in the memories of neighbors, in the whispers of former friends, in the court documents filled with sorrow. In the end, all that remained was a single man in a prison cell. The walls around him cold, bare, quiet. No photos of his children, no voice calling him Dad. Just silence. And Anthony Todt sat within it like he belonged there. Like the darkness he had birthed had finally become the air he breathed. He never cried in public. He never broke. Even after 4 life sentences had been handed down and the weight of what he had done was laid bare for the world, he held on to something. Not regret, not remorse, but a strange and disturbing certainty that he was somehow not entirely to blame. After his conviction, the letters began again. From prison, Anthony wrote with a mix of spiritual fervor and calculated self-pity. He claimed that Megan was truly the first to act, that she had smothered the children, and that he simply went along because he was devastated. Then he shifted again, suggesting that all 5 of them were meant to transition to the next world, that the earthly plane had become too painful, that he was trying to fulfill a divine mission. But no matter how many times he rewrote the story, the truth remained the same. Megan and the children were drugged. They were vulnerable, and he killed them. His version of events mattered little in the face of the evidence, and yet to Anthony, it seemed he clung to these revisions not to deceive the world, but to survive his own conscience. Because if he ever acknowledged the full truth of what he had done, that he planned the murders, that he lied about Megan, that he lived among their corpses as if nothing had happened, he might not be able to stay sane. So he folded his mind into a delusion, one that painted him not as a monster, but as a tragic figure in a story no one else could understand. Meanwhile, Megan's family tried to live with the wreckage he had left behind. Her parents had loved Anthony once. He had seemed gentle, loyal, spiritual. He had been there through Megan's illness. He had fathered their grandchildren. They had shared holidays, vacations, smiles and photographs now too painful to frame. And now they were left with only ashes, not just of Megan and the children, but of their faith in human nature. The betrayal ran so deep it almost defied language. They released public statements, not for sympathy, but to reclaim Megan's voice. They wanted the world to know that she had not chosen this, that she had been a victim, not a partner, that her final moments had been spent not in serenity, but in fear. Back in Celebration, the community struggled to make sense of the horror that had unfolded in their backyard. Some residents moved away, unable to walk past the house without remembering the smell, the sirens, the crime scene tape. Others became more withdrawn, wary of their neighbors, no longer willing to assume that a friendly wave meant safety, because Anthony Todt had seemed ordinary, and that was the most terrifying part. He didn't fit the profile of a killer. He wasn't violent in public. He wasn't loud or erratic or cruel. He was calm, smiling, helpful, and still, he was capable of unspeakable horror. The house on Reserve Place sat empty for months after the bodies were found. Its windows dark, its lawn slowly growing wild. The HOA made efforts to clean it up, to repaint it, to remove any sign of what had happened there. But no matter how many coats of paint they applied, the memory bled through. Because a house doesn't forget, it holds on to echoes. The soft sound of children's laughter that never came back, the muffled weeping, the silence that followed. For many, the home was not just a structure, it had become a symbol of how little we know about the people around us, of how quickly love can be twisted into possession, of how evil can wear a mask that looks like fatherhood. Forensic psychologists later reviewed the case and labeled Anthony a covert narcissist, someone who seeks to control not through force, but through passive dominance, shaping the world quietly, manipulating reality until only his truth remains. And when that world began to collapse, under financial pressure, legal threats, and personal shame, he chose annihilation over accountability. That decision, they said, was not spontaneous. It had roots, it had planning, and it had precedent. Just like his own father before him, who had also attempted to erase a woman from his life under the belief that he wouldn't face the full consequences. But Anthony did face consequences. His trial may have been short, but the judgment was absolute. 4 life sentences. No possibility of parole. No path to redemption. In prison, he exists in routine. Wake up, eat, wait, sleep, repeat. The walls don't care about his degrees or his clinic or his version of the truth. They only care that he can't hurt anyone else, that he is contained, that he is, at last, forgotten by the world he betrayed. And yet, some can't forget. The children's former neighbors in Connecticut still remember their laughter. Megan's old friends still sometimes check her Facebook page, long since frozen in time, hoping to find something, anything, that explains it all. But there's nothing. No final clue, no warning post. Just years of moments now soaked in grief. Birthday parties, school projects, drawings taped to the fridge, all gone, erased by the man who once promised to protect them. In the years since, many have asked the same question. Why didn't he just leave? Why didn't he walk away, confess, go to jail for the fraud, and let his family live? Why was death the only solution he could imagine? But Anthony Todt never gave a real answer. Not to the police, not to the courts, not even to his own family. Because in his mind, he wasn't escaping. He was controlling the story, the ending, the legacy. That's what made him dangerous. Not his rage, but his need for control. And in that need, he extinguished 4 lives and left behind a legacy of pain that no sentence can truly resolve. Today, Anthony Todt remains locked away, a name no longer spoken in celebration, a father without a family, a man whose crimes shattered every illusion of the perfect American life. His story will never be told as a tale of madness or misunderstanding. It will always be remembered as what it was, the quiet, methodical murder of those who trusted him most. There are no happy endings here, only silence, and the sound of names whispered in mourning. Megan, Alek, Tyler, Zoe,